settled up.
And would you guys go around and introduce yourselves while you're doing that?
Image, or do you think not the image, or no?
I didn't hear the first part of what you said for some reason.
The image, do you want that, or
Nope.
or you don't need that?
We're good, just the
All right.
way we are. Don't make it more complicated.
Okay.
Okay, people are
I
starting
think
to
Anne
come in.
was Anne, were you going to introduce everyone?
Yeah, Angela will start though with her thing.
Here we go. Okay, welcome everyone, and happy International Women's Day. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started shortly. Please be patient while we let everybody get logged in, and we'll set up the Facebook stream and we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Please note that we'll be recording this event and make it available on social media. If you have any questions for our guest, please write them in the Q&A box and she'll address them as time permits. So we can start off by, if you just want to type into the chat box where you're calling in from, that would be great.
Super.
Well, the 7 o'clock bells are ringing where I'm at, so it's almost time. Yeah, we have about 1 more minute left before we get started. Wow, we have someone from Guatemala. Yay, welcome.
I saw that.
Yeah, it's really great. Yes, we're wearing pearls.
They noticed our pearls.
Yes, for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Yes.
Ruthie pearls.
All right, we are live.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today as we celebrate International Women's Day with our special guest, Katherine Spillar. I'm Ann Hesse, and it's my honor to lead the Democrats Abroad Global Women's Caucus. I'm joined today by Angela Fobbs, who leads the DA Global Black Caucus, and Julia Bryan, our Democrats Abroad Global Chair. Leading our discussion today will be Marnie Delaney, who heads our GWC Issue Action Team, Eliminating Violence Against Women. Please note that we will be gathering questions for Kathy from our chat box on Zoom and Facebook. So you're welcome to type in your questions as we go along. Now I'd like to hand off to Julia, who will give us the latest scoop on how Democrats Abroad is pushing forward on issues that are vital to American women at home and around the world. Happy International Women's Day, Julia.
Well, thank you, Anne, and happy International Women's Day to you too, or happy Jin Din, as we say here, or Din Jin. I'm just so really thrilled to be here, and thank you so much, Kathy, for joining us. It's a real honor to have you speak with us tonight and this morning your time, and thank you again. One thing I just want to do is, just talk a little bit about where we are as a party. Democrats Abroad is really focused, just like the rest of the Democratic Party, on Congress and the legislative work that's going on now. And I just want to take a moment and remind everyone on the call that our votes from abroad that went to states all around the United States and also back to Georgia were crucial in helping win the Senate. Thanks to those votes and that work, Congress has just been able to pass the $1.9 billion COVID relief bill for all Americans. That's thanks to the work that we have all done this last year. And I just want to just have us all pause and say thank you again and congratulations, everybody. So moving forward, we have teams that are looking at other legislation now. We're working on the Equality Act. We're working on immigration reform. We're working on the ERA, but especially we are working on the For the People Act, which has just been passed in the House. You'll know it by HR 1, and it will become S1 in the Senate. Now, it's interesting because there's a subsection in that bill, subsection J, already for overseas voters that includes language that requires states to do more for overseas voters. For example, to pay for express delivery and return of ballots if a state fails to send ballots to overseas voters by a certain deadline. This is great news for us. It also includes language that adds enforcement. It adds real teeth to the rights that overseas voters already have, thanks to UOCAVA, which is the name of the bill that these amendments are going to be directed towards. It also increases the reporting requirements of states. They have to report back to the Attorney General about the status of their ballot distribution, both before the ballots go out to overseas voters and then after they go out. And so, we're really appreciative that this language is already in the bill. If you're interested in looking at it, there's some great information by the Brennan Center. They've gone through and written about each section and kind of pulled out abstracted it. But we're asking for more. We're reaching out to our Senate allies, and we're asking them to add an amendment to subsection J, which would include ensuring that all U.S. citizens can exercise their right to vote, regardless of whether or not they've ever lived in the United States before. Because as of right now, 14 states do not recognize the federal voting rights of U.S. citizens born overseas who've never resided in the U.S., but who would normally be able to vote back in those states based on their parents voting there. This is a basic civil right that needs to change, and we are really adamant that this needs to be added to this bill or to the John Lewis bill. So this is what we're working on right now. If that amendment gets introduced, we're looking forward to working with Americans abroad all across the world to reach out to each of our senators and to our representative back home to encourage them to support the amendment and support their constituents abroad. So please stay tuned for this action, and we appreciate the help. But now back to you, Anne. Thanks so much for giving me that opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Julia, that's so important. It's really vital work. I'm so glad you're at it. Thank you so much. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our special guest. But first, let me tell you a little bit about her and how special she really is. So, Katherine Spillar, as do many of you, wears many hats. She's the executive editor of Ms. Magazine and executive director of the Feminist Majority Foundation, the publisher of Ms. Magazine, which was founded back in 1972. Under Spillar's oversight since 2005, Ms. Magazine has increased its investigative reporting and today is one of the largest print and online feminist news sites, reaching readers across the globe. Under her direction, Ms. has developed an innovative digital textbook resource, Ms. Classroom, covering current feminist topics and activism and used by instructors for all levels of women's and gender studies courses in hundreds of college and university programs across the country. One of the founders of the Feminist Majority, Spillar has been a driving force in executing the organization's diverse programs aimed at securing women's rights domestically and globally since its inception in 1987. As an expert on anti-abortion terrorism, Spillar has overseen the organization's research and public education activities, law enforcement relations, litigation, as well as grassroots organizing to keep clinics open in the face of extremist violence. She's also played a vital role in the organization's work to mobilize young feminists on college and high school campuses. Spillar speaks to diverse audiences nationwide on a broad range of domestic and international feminist topics and appears frequently on television and radio. She's appeared on NPR's Morning Edition, 60 Minutes, The Rachel Maddow Show, CNN, and many other major news and commentary programs. Spillar also currently serves as a commissioner on the Los Angeles County Women and Girls Initiative. She holds a bachelor's degree in urban studies and a master's in economics, urban policy, and business. So, Kathy, welcome to our discussion. The stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Anne, and thank you, Julia, so much for those remarks and the introductions, and Angela for helping organize today. Happy International Women's Day. I want to give a special, though, shout out and thank you to Marnie Delaney. Marnie and I met and worked together in the Los Angeles chapter of the National Organization for Women years ago. And we've still been active all these years in what I think is the most important movement of our times because it impacts not only women in the United States, but women all over the world. It's half the population of this world to work for gaining our human rights and to be able to exercise our full rights as we live day to day. You know, I say it's the most important movement, not only because it's over half the world's population, but because women are the most likely to live in poverty together with their children. They're most likely to be denied an education, to be discriminated against based on gender-based stereotypes and social norms and practices and laws and policies that are in place. In fact, a recent World Bank report notes that only 10 countries of the world guarantee full legal rights for women. And sadly, the US is not among them. And I'll get back to that a little bit later. But we're celebrating today anyway, because against seemingly insurmountable odds all over the world, we continue to make progress for women and girls. And so today's event and all the events happening around the world and this month and Women's History Month are very, very important for continuing the struggle. And indeed, things are to be celebrated. And the current issue of Ms. Magazine celebrates what we are calling in the United States a transformational shift to a new era of gender equality, because feminist women are holding now some of the most consequential levers of power in the United States. For the first time in history, the presidential cabinet is going to be gender balanced if all of Biden's nominees are approved. Literally 48% of the cabinet, together with Kamala Harris, our vice president, will be women. And 7 of them are women of color. In fact, we celebrate on the cover of Ms. Magazine. I wanted to show everybody the cover because some of you aren't able to get it where you are. It's all the women that have been nominated for cabinet positions. And we hear that President Biden is also going to nominate someone to replace Neera Tanden, who had to withdraw this past week because of the attacks by predominantly Republicans against her. But we're very excited because never before have more than 8 women served in the cabinet of a first term of a president. So when Biden said he intended to have a cabinet that looked like America, he really meant it. And it's going to make a huge difference in what this cabinet does and what this administration accomplishes. And it actually puts the United States among the world's countries in the lead for one of the first times when it comes to women in political power. We have a wonderful article that we've posted on our website, msmagazine.com, that you should also read about the cabinet that looks like America, because it's written by 2 researchers, and they've done extensive research all over the world. And it does show that when women are included in cabinets in significant percentages, that we get more gender equitable outcomes as a result. There's greater spending on public health and family benefits. We get a more female-friendly labor policy coming out of these cabinets. And all of that, of course, is because women live very different lives than men and have very different life experiences that they bring to the decision-making tables when they're included in positions of power. Just a couple of the key positions that women will now hold in this cabinet that I think are worth mentioning. Janet Yellen, the first woman ever in the history of the United States to be Secretary of the Treasury. And as the researchers say in their article, it's particularly important because we're in a major economic crisis. We're one of the largest economies in the world. And it's quite unusual that women hold that position of power given these circumstances. And she's already talking about the needs that women face in this economic recovery, and ensuring that the policies that come out of the Biden administration are addressing some of those key problems that women in particular face. She's going to be joined, by the way, by many of Biden's appointments who are women in the economic sphere. A woman will also be head of the U.S. Council of Economic Advisors, head of commerce, head of the Small Business Administration, and the trade representative, as well as we are assured that we'll get another woman to head up the OMB, Office of Management and Budget. So at least the short list has only women on the list. So hopefully that will happen. Another position that is shattering a major glass ceiling in the Biden cabinet is that of the National Security Director, National Intelligence, Avril Haines. Again, the first woman to ever hold that position. And again, an unusual opportunity for a woman, given that the US has such a large military and is engaged in conflicts all over the world. And if we can get to it, we should also talk about what's happening in Afghanistan right now, and the need to ensure that women are not left behind in any peace settlement that's eventually reached. Of course, Linda Thomas Greenfield is going to be our new representative at the United Nations, a diplomat's diplomat, someone who understands diplomacy and the US role in the world. First Native American and a woman is going to head the Interior Department, Deb Haaland. She's also faced some real pushback by Republicans in the Senate, but we're hopeful that she will be confirmed. It's also going to be a woman at the head of energy and housing and urban development. So some very, very critical positions. We're just thrilled that Biden kept his promise, and we're going to see a real different face of this administration over the next weeks and months and years. So we are celebrating. Unfortunately, the 2020 elections didn't give us any real gains in the House or the Senate. We're still at only 27% representation in the House, 24% or 24 women in the United States Senate. The biggest gains were among Republican women because Republicans did pick up seats in the House. However, we did add 9 new feminist Democratic women to the House, and Democrats have the largest delegation, caucus rather, in the House, women at 89, and that compares to only 38 Republicans. And in the Senate, 16 of the 24 are Democrats, all feminists, 8 Republicans. And of course, we have a feminist woman speaker, Nancy Pelosi, who continues to, against huge odds, make progress for all of us. But if we don't pick up the pace of gain, it's going to be another century before women reach parity in the United States Congress. So we've got to speed things up. And hopefully with the Voting Rights Act, HR 1, and the assurances that we'll be able to vote and actually exercise our right to vote, as well as we hope through redistricting that we're going to see new opportunities created. And there are going to be opportunities to pick up Senate seats because right now, as of this morning, 5 Republican US senators have announced that they're not going to run again. So it gives us an opportunity, although some of the states they're retiring from are going to be pretty tough, but we're going to give it our best. And we can talk about the elections again a little bit later. Anyway, lots of work to be done. The Biden-Harris platform, though, has many, many specific promises for women and girls. And I just wanted to go through those really quickly, because if Biden can get these initiatives through either on executive order or by legislative measures in Congress, it's going to mean real progress. He's promised substantial investments in the childcare industry and the caregiving industry, not only childcare, but elder care as well. That's vital for women. It's vital to be able to participate in the paid labor market, but it's also vital for women being able to pursue opportunities that otherwise might be closed off to them. We've suffered a real crisis in this country, as I think countries all over the world in this pandemic. The childcare industry has been hit hard. Hundreds of thousands of childcare slots are in danger of never coming back. Now, the rescue package that has just passed the Senate and goes back to the House this week for a final vote does contain a $30 billion investment in childcare, which is a down payment on rebuilding this sector. But Biden and Harris have promised universal childcare and early childhood development programs. And we're going to be very focused on that over the next couple of years. The economic security prong for women of the Biden-Harris agenda includes fighting for equal pay and better wages, ending pregnancy discrimination and sexual harassment in employment, supporting student debt relief so women can pursue affordable educational pathways to enter higher paying professions. They've promised tougher enforcement of existing anti-discrimination laws. They plan to increase the number of investigators and litigators and enforcement actions. And they're hopefully going to be able to require mid-size and large employers to disclose compensation information by race, gender, and ethnicity. That will give us really true readings on the pay gap for women, and especially pay gap for women of color. Right now, it's commonly believed that women are at about 89% of what men make. That's simply not even true, because if you take into account benefits that accrue in some job positions and don't in others, and bonuses and years in the labor market and other aspects of how women's employment differs from men, in truth, we're still only at about 56%, which is a number close to what Marnie and I were fighting 35 years ago. So it's a critical ability to get the data. And Obama had done this, but it was too close to the end of his term. And of course, the Trump administration immediately reversed that. So we've hardly had any really solid data on the wage gap. This will give us the ability to do that, which is very important. If you don't know the extent of the problem, you don't know what to push for to solve it. They also, of course, have promised an increase in the minimum wage. We unfortunately lost that in the Senate as part of this rescue package. The parliamentarian ruled that you couldn't include the wage increase in the package under the reconciliation rules that they had to use to get the package through on a simple majority vote. They've promised both Biden and Harris to keep fighting. It's vital because women are the vast majority of minimum wage workers. Women of color especially, disproportionately represented among minimum wage workers. There's also a tipped minimum wage, which is even lower, under $3 an hour, assuming that you make that up in tips. But it's also, according to some recent research, opened the door even more to sexual harassment of tipped workers, because customers are demanding they remove their mask if they want a tip. It's been a real crisis on top of a crisis, and you just simply can't live in this country on minimum wage, much less the tip minimum wage. The other aspects of the Biden-Harris agenda, healthcare, which is a critical component of women's rights because of reproductive health and rights included in that. The Affordable Care Act, of course, included coverage of birth control at no cost or no copay and no deductibles to women and girls. Very critical, but Trump, during his administration, clamped down on that, making it more difficult. So we're looking to Biden and Harris to guarantee those rights again to access birth control. Also, although Biden, during his first week or two, did reverse the global gag rule, which was a critical problem for international aid for reproductive health. And Trump had even broadened it so that it was impacting everything from malaria to AIDS funding under the Trump administration. So that was very, very critical because the U.S. has been a major supplier internationally of reproductive health services. So that's going to make a big difference. Of course, there's also Trump put in a domestic gag rule that has to be reversed, which restricted access to Title X funding for reproductive health care providers here by blocking any money that would go to clinics that even counseled on where you could secure an abortion, much less provide abortions. $60 million, I'm sorry, was taken away from Planned Parenthood just on that basis. So that's going to be important to repeal. Also, Biden and Harris have promised to repeal the Hyde Amendment, which in the United States has blocked the use of federal funding for women on Medicaid to secure abortions. And globally, the Helms Amendment, which has done the same thing internationally, prevented the use of federal funding to provide abortion services. Even when abortion in war zones, where rape has been used as a weapon of war, has been denied U.S. funding assistance. So hopefully all of those will happen. Those are going to be some very tough lifts. And then the Violence Against Women Act, of course, Biden, it's one of his signature achievements when he was in the United States Senate. It has not been reauthorized since February of 2019 when it expired. Money continued to flow, but the Violence Against Women Act itself needs to be updated. The so-called boyfriend loophole needs to be closed so that any intimate partner who is convicted of a misdemeanor of domestic violence should not be allowed to purchase a gun. And we need more housing for survivors of domestic violence. We need more funding for youth violence prevention programs. Additional community resources are needed, as well as countering violent crimes on college campuses. And that is something that Biden addressed today in one of two executive orders. Today, he established the Gender Policy Council that will be in charge of looking at all whole of government treatment of women and girls and policies and programs that impact women and girls. We know the two co-chairs of that, very strong feminists. So we're very optimistic, even though the budget isn't what we had hoped for, that they will be able to make progress. But he also today ordered the Department of Education to review all of its regulations, its policies, and its programs to ensure that girls and women can get an education without facing sexual violence and harassment. And of course, under Trump and former Secretary DeVos, we slid very backward on those policies and programs. So that is, in short, an overview of what the Biden-Harris administration has promised, but perhaps the most important thing, which is in their platform, and the most important thing they can do for women and girls is to ensure that the Equal Rights Amendment is added to the United States Constitution. And so I'm going to finish my remarks by talking about where we are on the Equal Rights Amendment struggle. And I'll tell you, the caution here is that if we see the same dynamics play out that we just witnessed on the rescue package, where it passed both the House and the Senate by pure party line votes, even though a lot of aspects of that package had originally been proposed by Republicans. I mean, this is how they have again drawn the line against a Democratic administration. They will fight every proposal that comes before them, and it is going to require some pretty strong pushes to get things passed. We'll get it through the House, but it's the Senate where we face the filibuster problem that is going to keep some of these things from advancing unless we can convince the reluctant Democrats, they're going to have to get rid of the filibuster. There simply is no other way to make progress. And making progress right now is the most critical thing that we need. Back to the Equal Rights Amendment, and I know a lot of you are already up on this, so I'll go fast. It came out of Congress in 1972, had to be passed by 2/3 majorities in both the Senate and the House, and then was sent to the 50 states for ratification. The Constitution, Article 5, requires that 3/4 of the states must vote to ratify an amendment for it to become part of the Constitution. That meant that we needed 38 states. By the deadline, the time limit that Congress had placed in the preamble to the Equal Rights Amendment, not into the actual text of the amendment that is voted on and adopted, but the preamble to the Equal Rights Amendment, they placed a 7-year timeline. And as that timeline was approached in 1979, the movement began to extend the timeline. Actually, the push was to get rid of the time limit. There should be no time limit on equality. And it was a big push. But unfortunately, the time limit was only extended until June 30th of 1982. So by June 30th, still only 35 states had ratified. But what's happened in the meantime is that in 2017, Nevada voted to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, becoming the 36th state to vote to ratify. And by the way, Nevada is the only state in the country that has a majority women in its state legislature, both the Senate and the House in Nevada. And that's one of the reasons that things could start moving there again. Although there was never a lull in the movement for the Equal Rights Amendment. Grassroots activists in the unratified states kept working, hoping for ratification. Sorry. Then in 2019, Illinois voted finally to ratify. And that was the result of literally 30 years of organizing by feminist activists in Illinois to make that happen. That and the Speaker of the House there, who had been the single man to block the Equal Rights Amendment time and time again, got scared because one of his good buddies in Congress was challenged and nearly defeated, and was defeated this year, by the way, finally. And so he thought, these women are getting upset with us, we better do something, and he allowed it to finally be voted on. And then last year, just about now, Virginia, the state of Virginia, and we worked hard to flip that legislature from red to blue, voted to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, becoming the 38th and final state that we needed. After that, the attorneys general for Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia sued because the Trump administration, the Department of Justice under Bill Barr, issued an opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel, the OLC, that the time limit had expired and prohibited the archivist from putting the ERA into the Constitution, which is the last step, has to be published, that all 38 states had ratified and put it in the Constitution. So the 3 attorneys generals from these last 3 states sued the archivist and the Trump administration in federal court, arguing that the time limit was not in the text of the Equal Rights Amendment, and that it should be added, the ERA should be added to the Constitution. Unfortunately, literally Friday night, this past Friday night, we got an adverse ruling in that court case. The federal judge dismissed the suit, holding that the 3 states did not have standing to sue. However, he hasn't ruled out the possibility that Congress can change the time limit. He said the time limit as written was effective, and that it had passed. But he did not rule out the possibility that Congress could change the time limit. And that, by the way, has been the position of this movement for the past several years. And so in the House, next week, a resolution will pass, spearheaded by Congresswoman Jackie Speier from California. But it's a bipartisan resolution to remove the time limit on the Equal Rights Amendment. And Pelosi is leading that passage in the House. It then goes over, of course, to the Senate. And that's where we will face a filibuster. And even though the resolution itself can pass by a simple majority, we have to get by the 60 votes to close off debate. We have to get by the filibuster. Or we have to get very creative and do what's been done in the past and ensure that that bill, the resolution itself, gets tacked onto a must-pass bill in the Senate. If we can pass it in both houses, this resolution should then enable the Equal Rights Amendment to be added to the US Constitution. But it is going to take a very, very strong fight. We know that, by the way, that Republicans in the Senate, McConnell and Lindsey Graham, inalterably opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment. They intend to block it. In fact, during Merrick Garland's hearings, as he will hopefully become Attorney General, he's still not been confirmed, they asked a number of questions, written questions and follow-up. They are keenly interested in what he's going to do with that Office of Legal Counsel memo and what the new administration's position is going to be on removing the time limit. That tells you they are gearing up for a fight. They were so specific in their questions. And of course, the reason they are opposing the Equal Rights Amendment is the moneyed interests, the corporate interests that support the Republicans. It's the insurance industry that has been opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment from day one, because women are paying billions of dollars more than men for the same package of insurances. The ACA, the Affordable Care Act under Obama, actually had a provision prohibiting sex-based pricing of health insurance benefits. And that took away a huge way that insurance companies had been discriminated against women and overcharging them. But women continue to pay disproportionately for life insurance and for annuities and for auto insurance. So the insurance industry has been opposed from day one, and they are behind the scenes working to defeat the ERA. So are the chambers of commerce, by the way, although they publicly don't say they're opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment. You know, you really can't say that anymore, because 97% of Americans believe that women should have equal rights in the Constitution with men. I mean, it's Republicans, it's Democrats, it's old, it's young, it's every race and ethnicity believe that women should have equal constitutional rights. So you can't outright say you oppose it, but behind the scenes, their lobbyists are working overtime because with an Equal Rights Amendment, we get stronger enforcement of equal pay laws. We get a whole different approach to sex discrimination, whether it's in education or employment or in other areas of our lives. So it's a very, very critical move that we're all pushing for, so that we can finally begin to enforce the Equal Rights Amendment and secure more opportunities and more rights for women and girls. So all of that is at issue right now. If you are not on our email listservs, I urge you to either go to feminist.org, www.feminist.org, sign up to get our alerts, or go to msmagazine.com and sign up to get our alerts and our newsletters, and we'll be able to keep you up to date on what's happening on the Equal Rights Amendment. We just have started a major mobilization for people to email the member of the House that represents them, and to share that information with your friends and family and colleagues, to also be emailing their member of the House. That is the first test of whether this resolution is going to pass, and then we'll start working on the Senate. But as I said, I do think getting to 60 in the Senate is very difficult as long as we have these opponents lined up against us. But with enough organizing and enough momentum, we can figure a way through the Senate. And so much depends on the Senate being able to not only on the Equal Rights Amendment, all of the other issues that I touched on women and girls, but the Voting Rights Act, restoring the Voting Rights Act, and our civil rights and human rights are all at play. So hopefully, finally, the reluctant Democrats will wake up and understand that the filibuster and its entire history has been to simply block. It's never really been to debate. It has been to block. And so if we want progress, we're going to have to get rid of it. So I will pause so we can take questions. And hopefully I touched on some of the key issues you all were interested in.
Oh gosh, yes, you did. Thank you so much, Kathy. It was a little bit like going down memory lane, I have to say. It was 59 cents back then. I still have my buttons. So you talked a little bit about violence against women and healthcare, and you know, COVID has presented some interesting challenges, certainly with domestic violence increasing, and you know, people being trapped at home and not being able to even make a phone call. I understand that texting has been on the rise to the crisis lines. So, I mean, how is that going to get addressed, do you think, through the actions that Biden is taking?
Well, by the way, the House next week too is scheduled to vote on reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act and including these additional resources for community resources, for survivor housing, and for closing some of these loopholes. So though it will face more roadblocks in the Senate, but it is going to come out of the House the week of March 18th. Biden feels so strongly about this. He's going to do everything he possibly can through executive orders. And I think that again, the Republicans in the Senate have blocked this every time. Why is a little bit of a mystery. Why is anyone against addressing violence against women? But they have blocked it repeatedly. The excuse has been that some of the provisions would be expanded to Native American lands and to immigrants, which is a major problem, by the way. All too often undocumented immigrants don't want to make the call for help because they're afraid that will trigger them being expelled from the country. So that has been their excuse for blocking it. But you're right, Marnie, this has been a real problem under COVID. And I know that the community serving domestic violence has been keenly aware, and they've done a lot to expand the ability of people to be able to reach them, including special texting messages, so that if an abusive partner finds the phone, they don't know that's what you're texting about. And that if you're online, you can also be posting information. So there's been a lot of work done on that, but without the additional resources, you know, we can't hope to make too much progress. It's been one of the key problems during COVID facing women all over the world, no question.
Yeah. Also, I want just to go on a positive note. I wanted to hear a little bit about the work that you're doing with students, with college campuses, and maybe, if nothing else, you can give us some hope for the next year, since we know that things take a while sometimes. What are you seeing on the college? Well, a lot of people aren't on their campuses, but on and off the college campuses.
Right. Actually, there's cause for great hope. You know, we every once in a while there will be a national poll asking the question, do you consider yourself a feminist? And it's usually asked in a multi-part question. Do you consider yourself a strong feminist, a feminist, not a feminist, or you don't know? And it's the 18 to 30 age group that always polls the highest. Every age group, by the way, polls over majority. So a majority of women at about 60% now in the United States self-identify as a feminist. But among the youngest generation, the numbers are even higher and approaching 67, 69%. And then if you ask men the same question, about 40% of men now self-identify as feminist. And that's without any definition. So that's just asking the question. And then if you clarify what the definition is, those numbers go higher. But what we've seen on the college campuses over the last several years, I would say really since Trump, has been an extraordinary amount of activity, a lot of activism. And it has been pushed even higher under the move for racial justice, following some of the police killings of African Americans. So we have seen this huge increase in activity on college campuses and among young people in general. We've always had a whole program aimed at college campuses because we knew from the beginning that it was the strongest base of support for feminism and for women's equality, plus for civic engagement, for getting out the vote. It's a wonderful population because they're all grouped in the same place, other than during COVID, of course. So you're able to hire students on their campuses who work part-time during the election period to make sure that their college classmates are registered to vote, that they know what's at stake, and that we get voting locations on the campuses, we get early voting locations on the campuses, and that they generate a lot of visibility and activity so that students vote. And students have increased their voting rates dramatically in the last two elections, in 2018 and 2020. And in fact, and we've continued this, our work on the college campuses in targeted states, Arizona, Colorado, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, you can name the states. And we've not only seen increased voting, but especially among, there's even a gender gap among students, with young women voting overwhelmingly for Democrats. Young men, not as much, but a majority. And this last election, young people literally were the margin of victory for Biden-Harris in Arizona, in Michigan, and in Pennsylvania. So had they not voted in those very high rates, we would have lost those three states. Plus, the Senate race in Arizona was also decided by a decisive margin of difference of young people. Same thing in Michigan. We kept that seat because of young people. And so time and time again, we see the votes of young people making a huge difference. But you know, there's no debate on a campus about full human rights, LGBTQ, racial justice, civil rights, women's rights. There's no debate. The only thing that you have to focus on, which is what we do, and a lot of other groups now are working on the campuses too. We were the only ones in the early days, but now there's huge coalitions on the campuses to make sure that students know where they get registered, how to vote, where to go vote. So it was a very successful effort over many years. So I'm very optimistic over the longer term. But all of us on this webinar today deserve to see equality in our lifetimes, and that's what we're pushing for.
Well said, well said. Julia, I think you have a question next.
I do. And, you know, this is so exciting to hear you talking about students voting, because of course, there are tens of thousands of students who usually in regular years study abroad and have the opportunity to vote. And we would love to work with you and MS to make sure all of those students know that when they travel abroad, they can vote back home. So that would be my you know, we would love to do that. We have a nonpartisan arm called votefromabroad.org, and we would love to work with you. We actually even have a website that's specifically for students, so that, you know, it's completely nonpartisan, because we know that a lot of times when people travel abroad, they might think, oh my goodness, how do I send my ballot back to North Carolina? I don't know. And so we make sure that we try to make sure that that's as easy as possible, and just letting them know they have that opportunity. It's like, it adds to the student abroad experience for them. You know, they can check it off their bucket list when they when they get to vote that way. It's really fun. So we would love to do that if that's
Absolutely, absolutely. And we do both nonpartisan and partisan.
exactly. Oh,
We have
wonderful.
a
We
partisan
can do
arm
that
and a
too.
nonpartisan, so that's great.
Oh, fantastic to hear. Thank you so much. And one other question, one of the things that we do quite a lot about work in is making sure is voter protection. And is there, what would you say coming up, besides getting these very important bills passed, what are some of the efforts that you guys are working on to push back against voter suppression in the states?
Well, of course, we're part of the whole national coalition to try and get HR 1 passed in the Senate, because that will override all of these horrific voter suppression efforts now being waged in Georgia and Texas and Arizona. Any place where Democrats either won this last time and flipped the state or almost flipped the state. So our campus groups are working with state coalitions in those states. And of course, we put a lot of information out on Ms. and on Feminist Majority Foundation on how people can get involved at the grassroots level. So we're not the lead on those efforts. Usually it's the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights or the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, the Brennan Center, as you said. There's a lot of grassroots groups that are involved in those efforts. And the women's movement is well represented at the grassroots level too, because the suppression is aimed at young people, it's aimed at people of color, and it's aimed at elderly women. And so those are very, very important efforts. And updating, keeping people updated is part of the fight. So we try and do that on MsMagazine.com.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Now I think Anne has a question for you.
Oh, there are so many questions coming in, Kathy. I don't know where to start, but I'm going to add one tiny question for you before I go to the chat box. We were talking about young people and Ms. Magazine, and could you tell us what the connection with Amanda Gorman and Ms. Magazine is?
Actually, it's through the Feminist Majority Foundation. We have a program for high schools called Girls Learn International. And we have clubs, they're after-school clubs in about 230 high schools across the country and in 9 other countries. And it's an after-school program. They learn about women's human rights and girls' human rights and about the United Nations and the importance of CEDAW. And she, Amanda Gorman, was a leader and actually helped start the club at her high school in Los Angeles. I actually, on the Ms. Magazine website, we posted a story, and she's wearing a t-shirt with Ms. on it. And her good friend who helped her start the club has a t-shirt, "This is what a feminist looks like." And so we are still in touch with her and been doing a lot of bragging since January 20th when the world got to know her. But even in high school, I shared the stage with her and her fellow students. And even then, she was just really extraordinary.
That is such a wonderful story. I'm so glad I found that out. That's wonderful. Okay, so speaking of young people, I'm going to read out a question from one of our young volunteers for Democrats Abroad Global Women's Caucus. She's Stacy Camparo, who is a young mother and also our communications co-chair. And this is her question. We've touched upon the mystery of the Republican Party being seemingly against policies that progress women's rights and issues. Can you speak about the newly elected Republican women in Congress? Republican women made strides in 2020. What is your view about the women who are part of a party that seems very acutely anti-women? Good question.
Good question. Unfortunately, most of them are opposed to the feminist agenda and probably would not even identify themselves as feminists, although there are some who are more moderate. We would welcome them to join these battles in the House and the Senate to move forward on women's rights. But unfortunately, most will not. It's been a real disappointment, although let me say that she's not new, but Lisa Murkowski is a co-sponsor of the resolution in the Senate to lift the time limit on the Equal Rights Amendment. And others have indicated they might come our way, although what people have to understand is that in both the House and the Senate, these are not individuals making up their minds on how they're going to vote on different bills, by and large. This is a team sport. And so if the leadership of the Republicans in either the House or the Senate have made a decision that they will oppose a certain bill, and by the way, other than Liz Cheney, there's no women in leadership of the House, and I don't think there's really any in the Senate among the Republican leadership. So once a decision has been made, you risk retribution if you diverge from the party line, and I mean the party line. So we can see what's happening right now to those handful of Republicans who voted to impeach and to convict. They are being attacked viciously by their own. You risk losing your position on your favorite committee that is maybe important for delivering whatever you need to back home. So it's very difficult to expect even those who lean in our direction to diverge from the party line. So people need to understand that, because it is baffling all too often why we can't get more support, especially when, you know, we just saw it on this rescue package. The vast majority of Republicans and Democrats in every state supported passage, and yet we had Republicans across the board voting against it. So that's the reality. We all wish it was different. We all wish that we really had functioning debates and all of that, but we don't, and we just have to face that and try and make progress while we have a chance.
Right. Mr. Smith is not in Washington right now.
No, no, no.
No. I think, Angela, do you have a question from the chat box there?
Yes, I actually have first, it's more of a comment from Jill Bordes. She asked that she's tried to donate to Ms. from France, but they don't accept foreign addresses. Is there any way you can change that?
I will address that right away.
Yeah, and please be sure to include Army Post Office also, if you don't already have that, because I've tried to donate to many things and they're like, nope, sorry. So that's just a little note.
Thank you.
But our first question comes from Katie Solon. She's a member in Germany, and she says, has Merrick Garland made any public statement about what he would do to direct the archivist to record the 28th Amendment, the ERA, or not?
Well, he hasn't made any public statements. And because when he was answering the Republicans' questions, they're the ones who peppered him in written questions. You not only ask questions during the hearing itself, live, but you can submit questions that a nominee is obligated to answer. Obligated, of course, the Democrats do, the Republicans never did. But anyway, his answer was what you would expect. He's still on the Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia, and this case was pending in his circuit over the whether or not the archivist could be ordered to put the Equal Rights Amendment in the Constitution. And so he answered honestly that, you know, because of the pending case and he was a sitting judge, he couldn't answer the question. Now, then what he also said during the hearings, though, is that he and President Biden agree that the Department of Justice must be independent, that the president cannot order the Attorney General to investigate a person or to prosecute a person. So for investigations and prosecutions, the Justice Department will again be independent. However, Judge Garland said in the hearings that on policy matters, he is part of the Biden administration. And on policy matters, he will follow the administration. And Biden and Harris have been very clear of their support for the Equal Rights Amendment. So we would anticipate that there will be real movement at the Department of Justice when it comes to the Equal Rights Amendment. And by the way, my favorite quote of Kamala Harris when she was still in the running for president in Iowa was asked a question at one of the gatherings. What will you do to ensure women's rights if you become president? And her answer was, well, let's just start with the Equal Rights Amendment. So she's going to be an outspoken advocate, as is President Biden, and he always was when he was in the Senate. So, and the power of the presidency is huge, and we've watched him already yield it for the common good, and hopefully we know we can count on him. Timing is everything, so stay tuned.
So let's see, Kathy, as you work with both the foundation and the Feminist Majority, Mountain Movement for that matter, where do you see the most bang for your buck, as it were, when you look at organizing and really getting results? I mean, is it the letter writing? Is it the lobbying in person? Is it, what phone, did I say phone banking? Anyway, what techniques have you found real success with?
Well, if you're trying to organize and lobby Congress, I think the best right now is still probably email and constituents showing up. Of course, that's not possible for Democrats living abroad, but for your friends and colleagues here, when we again can show up in person, it can be very effective. And showing up at the district meetings and the district town halls. In terms of organizing people generally, email and phoning is still, and texting the best if you can't do something in person. Social media, of course, helps raise visibility and awareness. But just because you put something out as on Facebook or Instagram or any of the other social media platforms, that's all about raising visibility, which is very, very important. If people don't know that something's at stake, then there's no way for them to take action on it, because we all can't possibly be keeping up with everything. But organizing is still a critical component of making change. And it's a very critical component of the feminist movement, and always has been. The marches, the rallies, the demonstrations, what we saw this past summer and into the fall was just extraordinary. And so all of that has to continue, so that, and where we are right now in the Equal Rights Amendment is to show the magnitude of the public support for the Equal Rights Amendment. We don't have to convince people that women should have equal constitutional rights. We've just got to show the massive support that the ERA enjoys, so that some of these members of Congress get a little nervous. After all, the Republicans lose their elections because they lose women's votes. That's been very clear. 2018 was probably the biggest wake-up call for Republicans when it comes to women's votes. And women are still voting by significant margins over men for the Democrats. In this last election, men voted for the Republican House candidate, women voted for the Democratic House candidate, by and large. In the presidential, it was a 9-point gender gap. The majority of men voted for Trump, the majority of women voted for Biden-Harris, led by Black women, no question, and Latinx women. So they know they have a problem with women, and they increasingly have had a problem with college-educated women who live in the suburbs. Blacks, whites, Latinx, college-educated are totally opposed to the Republican agenda. And by the way, college-educated men as well, by slimmer margins. So they know they have a problem with women in the vote. And if we can just keep mobilizing women especially, but the men who are with us, it's got to make them nervous, because this next round of elections is going to be close, and we all have to start organizing very soon for the House elections and the Senate elections in 2022. We can't come to that party late. So we're going to be starting, and I know you all will be too, because it's going to be a tough, tough battle, especially if they implement some of these voter repression laws.
I think Julia might have a question that follows up on that a bit.
I do. Thank you so much. So, as we're thinking about equal rights for women, we're often thinking about equal rights for people of color. And one question I have is about MS Magazine's outreach to different populations and diverse populations. And we have a question from Ann Hesse about this. She says, what is MS doing to reach out to increase diversity and intersectionality amongst its readers and potential readers?
We are hyper conscious of, and always have been. I have to credit Ms. and we've been publishing it now for 20 years. It was published for almost 30 years before us. From the very beginning, understood intersectionality and reported on issues that affect gender, but also gender and race and class. From the very beginning, Ms. has covered issues of poverty and wages and employment and reproductive health and rights from a very intersectional perspective. And we have a huge number, by the way, of academics who write for us. We have a wonderful Ms. Committee of Scholars. And so we actually recruit and train scholars to write for popular media like Ms. and which is a bit of a transition for academics frequently to write in language that everybody can understand. But it's proven to be a very big boost because in the women's studies and gender studies field and political science, intersectionality has been a position that has been taught and for many years. And so we have experts on these different issues writing for us that come from that perspective of intersectionality. And it's important to understand it because, it's important to understand problems in their full dimension. It's not just gender, because gender and race combined makes for women of color an even tougher situation. Or class, poor women versus women who have means. So we always try and report very honestly and from an intersectional perspective. And I think we achieved that.
Well, thank you so much. That's really good to know, and we appreciate your answer and response.
So, Kathy, I think we have a couple more questions anyway. I would like to ask something about your perspective on the tensions or relationship between the farther left within Congress and the more moderate folks. I don't really have to expand on that. That's the question.
Yeah, it's I'll tell you, I marvel at how Speaker Pelosi can hold it all together because you have such a range of perspectives. And it's because, of course, that in House districts especially, you've got different kinds of populations that these House members are having to answer to. But she does it with such grace and has been able to hold it together, although there's lots of rumblings. And of course, in the Senate, there's one member of the Democratic Party in particular who's been problematic. And according to the New York Times and the Washington Post, Leader Schumer, Majority Leader Schumer, just finally said to Senator Manchin, this is it, you got to stick with us or the whole ship will fail. And Senator Manchin agreed, obviously. But these are healthy debates that are happening within these caucuses, and there's a give and take. And I think that everybody approaches it knowing that in the end, they've got to stick together, because it's very clear that the Republicans in both the House and the Senate have made a decision that they will oppose everything that the Biden administration proposes. And so if the Democrats don't stick together on the final votes, we will not be able to move forward. And, rescuing this economy, ending this pandemic, and addressing the racial injustices and the lack of equality is just so critical to the Biden agenda. And so I think we're going to see at the end of the day a lot of cohesion, even though I think some of the behind the scenes debates are going to get pretty brutal. That's my guess.
Okay, one little question, and then I think Anna has got the final one. But why don't I ask you just to talk 2 seconds on the filibuster in general and where that's going to go?
We got to get rid of it. That's I think certainly most progressives have arrived at that a long time ago, and I just don't see any way around it eventually. And the question is, how fast will Senators Manchin and Kirsten Sinema and whoever else says they believe in the filibuster arrive at it? What's very clear, and I got a new book that I haven't finished reading yet, is that the filibuster has not been really to encourage debate. It hasn't been.
No.
And it has been from day one to defeat civil rights and women's rights and progressive social policies. That's the reason for the filibuster. And so the sooner we all understand that and arrive at that conclusion, the sooner we can get rid of it. Why should a handful of people be able to block all progress for this country? And we suffered, terribly under the Obama administration. And I think that the Biden administration came into the presidency understanding that they're not going to get the kind of cooperation that Biden had talked about during the campaign and had hoped for. Unfortunately, it's not because he hasn't tried, but it's because the Republicans have just said, we're not going to go along. And so I'm hoping that by summer that some of the holdouts in the Senate will come to the same conclusion. And actually, on the Sunday talk shows, Manchin sort of opened the door on that. He said, at least we ought to make it harder for them to filibuster. Right now, they just filibuster by letting the majority leader know they're not going to cooperate. They don't have to stand there like Mr. Smith goes to Washington and debate. They don't have to do anything. They just have to say, we object. Well, you shouldn't be able to do that. Now, we'll see if he comes a little bit further around on that and comes to support ending the filibuster. It's the only way forward.
Well, we'll check in with you in the summer. So I think Anne has one last question for you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we have here, Kathy, you have an absolute captive audience of American activists who are really from all over the world listening to you today. So can you tell us how we can best support you and the really, really important work that you're doing for women's empowerment from all our far-flung locations around the world? Do you have a special call to action for Americans overseas?
Yes, the first step, and by the way, Marnie's told me about some of the work that you all have done over the last many months, especially leading into the election, and I'm just very blown away by it all. Just extraordinary, really. And so I hope that you'll want to join our efforts, especially right now in the Equal Rights Amendment, but on all of the things that we're fighting for. So, and I hate to use the word fight, that's now been so politicized, but that we're pushing for women and girls. And it's not only here in the US, but we're pushing a global agenda as well. And the US has such an important role to play globally because, we lecture other countries on democracy, but yet we don't have a full democracy here at home. And so what the US does on women's rights here will impact women all over the globe. But to stay connected, we need you to go to feminist.org or to msmagazine.com and give us your email. And then we'll keep you up to date on what's happening. You can also join our daily newsletter or our weekly newsletter at Ms., and we'll give you the most important feminist stories of the week. We do report globally, and if you have something you want us to report on, let us know. We very much want to reflect the global community of feminists. And we do that in the magazine and on the website, so let us know. But if we can't reach you, we can't mobilize you at critical times. And right now, there are going to be many critical votes on the Violence Against Women Act, on the Equal Rights Amendment, and on aspects of these rescue packages that impact especially on women and girls. So hopefully you'll join our alert networks and we'll be able to stay in touch.
Wonderful. I've already signed up and I'm getting some really wonderful updates. So I would really recommend that to everybody, to do exactly what she says. You won't believe the high quality of information that's coming out. So thank you so much, Kathy, for all the information that you've thrown at us. It's really wonderful. And to all of you who are listening, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion as much as I have. And for those of you who are listening, please do check out our GWC website for information about more events and materials you can use as we continue to celebrate Women's History Month. So in closing, I'd first like to thank Kathy Spillar very much for being with us. And I'd like to thank all of our many volunteers who are out there working hard, and let everyone on the call know that we'd love you to have to come and volunteer with us too, wherever in the world you might be. Because as a GWC volunteer, there is a real satisfaction in knowing that we too are part of making women's history, adding to the story of American women in small but really important ways. So please consider joining our team, and our links are in the chat box. But for now, we'll say goodbye and leave you with a short clip highlighting Amanda Gorman and our wonderful GWC volunteers and our issue action teams. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a happy International Women's Day. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Kathy, thank you so much.
Oh, no, absolutely. Thank you for asking. It's so wonderful to meet all of you, and Marnie, to see you.
I know. Next time in person.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank
It was
you.
an honor to have you join us.
Yes.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Bye-bye,
Bye-bye.
All
everyone.
right, we're ending our
Bye-bye.
live
Thanks,
stream.
Marnie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Right. Well, we had a nice little audience on Facebook. So
Yeah, I saw.
Did we?
Good.
yeah. So that's great.
Yeah.
We still recording on Zoom?
Oh, wait, I stopped the stream. Okay, I will stop recording. Wait, yes.